Cosmology in Crisis, Electricity in Space, Part 1. Fear of the known. Mainstream astronomers have a problem, a big problem, an astronomical problem, dare we say. Space, once thought to be a near-perfect vacuum, has been found to be alive with plasma and electromagnetism. This fact has, as you might say, thrown a spanner in the works. The trouble is, plasma and its EM behaviors have an unfortunate habit of ignoring the elegant mathematical laws of which modern astronomy is based. Today, scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. Nikola Tesla. Mother Nature, it seems, is no respecter of human folly. Haynes Alvin hit the nail on the head in regard of math-based gravity-centric cosmology. Such theories are developed with the most sophisticated mathematical methods, and it is only the plasma itself which does not understand how beautiful the theories are and absolutely refuses to obey them, Haynes Alvin. EM is 10 to the 39th more powerful than gravity. That is, 1 with 39 zeros stronger. How can a weak force like gravity dominate in a universe that crackles and hums with electricity? EM forces are also longer range than gravitational forces in most instances. Furthermore, filamentary plasmas can act like huge power circuits in space, sometimes in dark mode and sometimes in visible glow or arc modes. How will scientists deal with the fact that space is not electrically neutral, contrary to their assumptions? Will they continue to close their eyes and hope the issues will go away, or will they confront them? Thus far, the mainstream seems happy to rely on obfuscation, mathematical abstraction, and ad hoc hypotheticals. Of course, we need to bear in mind that billions of dollars have been invested in scientific ideology. The peer review system is satisfactory during quiescent times, but during a revolution in a discipline such as astrophysics, when the establishment seeks to preserve the status quo. Haynes Alvin. History repeats itself when Faraday created an electric current by moving magnetic inside a coil of wire. They laughed. Worse still, they called him a charlatan and a fraud. Later, when Christian Birkeland posited that auroras were powered electrically, they laughed again. Birkeland went on to prove this with his famous Torella experiments. The electric currents that flow through space are named after him, Birkeland currents. Hans Alfvén is generally regarded as the father of plasma physics and plasma cosmology. He was sidelined for many years, during which time he could only get his work published in Russian and other more obscure journals. While his work with laboratory plasmas is now well known, the cosmological implications of this work are less well known and still largely overlooked. Gravitational systems are the ashes of prior electrical systems. Hans Alfvén.
I want to make here, there are 4 states of matter. In school, we typically are aware of 3 of those. A solid, add energy, it becomes a liquid, add energy, it becomes a gas, add energy, and it becomes a plasma. Many writers in the press confuse plasma as simply an electrified gas. No, it's a different state of matter. It has behavior that's distinctive, and that's the shocker that comes out of all of this. And so the four states of matter. The entropy is maximized for the plasma. The entropy is minimized as a solid. Okay. Now, astronomers explain their views about it. See, they can relate to gravity. We can visualize gravity every time an apple falls to the floor. We understand gravity, we think. So they try to explain what they think they know about the universe in gravity terms. They rely on 17th and 18th century tools of their forefathers, Kepler and Newton, whenever they deal with gravity, fluid mechanics, magnetism, lodestone, rather than those tools of the 19th century. They never bothered to learn James Clerk Maxwell's discoveries. People going to electrical engineering really learn that stuff and produce products as a result of that. But Clerk Maxwell, the electromagnetic field theory. Furthermore, the astronomical conjectures are not empirically based. They're not done by scientific method. They're conjectures upon conjectures. They ignore data that does not support the presuppositions or the preconceptions. Therefore, they must postulate particles they've never seen and forces they have not experienced. If you read about the frontiers in astronomy, constantly talk about particles they haven't. They're spending a fortune on trying to find particles that they've never seen and forces that they haven't experienced. Why are they hunting for them? We have no reason to believe they exist. Not really. If you've been through some of our materials on quantum physics, you may remember this chart. I only want to get one number out of it. We have gravity and electromagnetic and their relative strengths. Electromagnetic strength is about 10 to the minus 2 of the strong force. The gravity is 10 to the minus 38. It's the ratio between those two I want you to be aware of. The electromagnetic force, there's four forces in the universe, but the electromagnetic force in the universe is 10 to the 36th times as strong as gravity. I want that to sink in. Not 36 times, 10 to the 10 with 36 zeros after it, times as strong. It can be that much different, okay? And by the way, it can go positive or negative. Gravity attracts but doesn't repel. Electromagnetic does both. Oodles more, okay? Now, the effects of gravity are minuscule. The effects of electromagnetism can be 10 to the 36 times as great. The entire volume of our galaxy is filled with diffuse clouds of magnetized plasma, electrically charged ionized particles. 99% of the matter in the entire universe is in the form of plasma. There's no missing mass. It's in a form that's been ignored by the astronomers because it may not be visible, because plasma is only visible under certain conditions. Now, on August 8th of 2010, there was a hidden aurora found near New Zealand. This was observed from the International Space Station. You're looking at this from above it. And that's obviously, if you'd make a guess, that looks electrical to me, right? And surprise it is. So what we're going to discover is there's a group of pioneers, scientific pioneers, that are all from Sweden or Norway, the high latitudes. Why? Because they're confronted with the auroras. And they got curious, what is an aurora? They started studying. Christian Birkeland is one of those, 1867 to 1917. He made a heroic commitment gathering data. Instead of theorizing, he went out in the cold, long nights. Their nights go for months, right? And gathering data, risking his life. In gathering that data, he learned a lot about auroras. He was the first to recognize the electric currents flow from the sun to excite plasmas in the Earth's upper atmosphere. He discovered the twisted corkscrew-shaped high-intensity currents in the plasmas that follow magnetic fields rather than across them, the so-called Birkeland currents. And he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics 7 times. His portrait remains on the kroner, the 200 kroner Norwegian currency to this day. Interesting guy. He was succeeded by Irving Langmuir, 1881 to 1957, roughly the same birth and death of my dad. It happens coincidentally, that's why I happen to remember it. He discovered the double sheath, or the double layer effect in plasma. I'll show you that in a minute. He coined the term, he's the one that coined the term plasma to describe the almost lifelike, self-organizing behavior of these ionized clouds in the presence of electric currents, magnetic fields, and foreign bodies that are inserted in them. These plasmas start to behave in an organized way because of the laws that they follow, which are very different than non-plasma materials. He invented the Langmuir probe, which is used to this day for research here. Now, there's double layer phenomenon. One of the most important properties of a plasma is its tendency to isolate one section from another electrically by a wall of two closely spaced layers. They call that a double layer. One of positive charges, the other negative. It does this intrinsically to protect itself from intrusions. A DL, or a double layer, is where the strongest electric field will be in any plasma will be found. And plasmas isolate themselves from foreign intruders by surrounding themselves with a double layer as a protective sheath. That's just they have a behavior that's almost as if they had their own intelligence, so to speak. Well, he was followed by Hannes Alfvén, who was 1908 to 1995. Notice we're getting to recent years here. This is a new technology. And this guy was first to predict the large-scale filamentary structure of the universe back in 1963. That's when it first proposed, by the way. He first proposed the mechanism for the acceleration of cosmic rays, now known as the Fermi mechanism. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1970, and on it goes. In February of 1981, 11 years after Swedish electrical engineer Hannes Alfvén won the Nobel Prize in Physics, he published Cosmic Plasma, a book which has been largely ignored by the astrophysics community. And what you're going to see here is stuff that the astronomers, the astrophysicists, have chosen to ignore, to their peril, as it turns out. Our space probes have confirmed his views. So this is giving the point, we've got evidence now compiling. Over 99% of the universe is composed of electric plasmas. And they obey, here's the important thing, they obey the same laws as small laboratory plasmas do here on the Earth. We can recreate these shapes and forms in the laboratory. We understand that behavior, and it turns out we're observing that behavior in the galaxies. So you're getting empirical confirmation here. We get to Anthony Peratt. He's an author of The Physics of the Plasma Universe, which I encourage you to get a copy if you're technically oriented. Numerical and experimental contribution to high energy density plasma, tense particle beams, explosively driven pulse power generators. You can already tell this thing's getting classified, isn't it? Lasers, intense power, microwave devices, particles, high energy density phenomena, Z-pinches, and a bunch of other things that I'll show you up here in a minute. He's at the Los Alamos National Laboratory from '81 to the present, serving Applied Theoretical Physics Division, and so forth. And he's also scientific advisor to the United States Department of Energy, where he served as acting director, National Security and Nuclear Proliferation Directorate, and so on. He made large-scale simulations of the Maxwell-Lorentz equations, and he was able to yield the same results in those simulations that are indistinguishable from the astro images from actual galaxies. And here's a group of the pictures. These were done in the laboratory, and we see the same shapes and behavior that we observe through telescopes. So it's interesting confirmation. The effects of gravity are minuscule. The effects of electromagnetism can be 10 to the 39 times more. The entire volume of our galaxy consists of magnetized plasma. 99% of all matter is plasma. Here is a picture of M31. You've seen this in all your astronomy textbooks, a very common picture of Andromeda, as it's called, right? That's invisible light. Let's take a look at this in infrared. And you begin to see the electric structures that underlie that thing. And we look at M82, and if you look at it in other frequencies, you realize it's a plasma structure. If you look at it infrared, as you look at these, you begin to realize that there are aspects to those structures that are not normally visible in light. And you can almost see the axis, and you can see the other behavior. Maxwell equations. There are 4 partial differential equations that relate electric and magnetic fields to the sources, charge density, and current density. And these equations can be combined to show that light is an electromagnetic wave. The interactions of electrostatic and electromagnetic forces are very non-intuitive. One of the problems in this area is we're not talking about 1 or 2 dimensional relationships. We can deal with one or two dimensional relationships. We can't normally deal with mutually orthogonal relationships. I'll show you what I mean. The forces are orthogonal to the fields, and the resulting plasma takes on a unique aspect as a composite body with a very distinctive character. You see, the magnetic field is in one direction, the velocity is in a different direction, and the force is that these are all mutually orthogonal. Each one is 90 degrees from the other, and that their behavior among themselves is very non-intuitive. You've got to experiment these to get a feeling for how plasmas behave, because these are all mutually orthogonal. Are you with me so far? Okay. In fact, the engineers will speak of a right-hand rule. If you have an electric current, around that electric current there'll be a magnetic field. If the current is changing, the field will be changing. If the field is changing, the current will be changing. They're intrinsically hooked, and they're hooked with what they call the right-hand rule. You put your thumb in the direction of the current, your fingers will point in the direction of the field. You with me? They're inextricably linked, okay? You don't have one without the other. And that's the net of those equations, the so-called right-hand rule. Now, it turns out that plasma you don't normally see. It has three modes. It can be dark where there's no light admitted. You don't see it normally. The Earth's ionosphere, except during auroras, is invisible, okay? Electric current, if the current is very, very low, you don't see the plasma. Now, you add a little more current, it goes in what they call the normal glow mode. When you see a neon sign, that is in the glow mode. It's a plasma that's going through that tube. It emits light. Auroras, emission nebula, the sun's corona, and comet trails are all examples of plasma that is in normal glow mode. The brightness and intensity of the current and density of the plasma and so forth. The color depends on what gas is being ionized here. Okay. Then you get to the bright one, the arc mode. You got dark, normal, and then arc, which is extremely bright and a very wide spectrum of emission. Electric welding. You never look with unprotected eyes at someone doing electric welding because you're seeing an arc and it has frequencies that'll hurt your eyes. The sun's photosphere. You never look directly at the sun. And lightning. Fortunately, it's so brief it won't do that much damage to you. And sparks are examples. It's characterized by twisting filaments both in the ultraviolet and in the radio frequencies. We also encounter a strange thing called the Z-pinch effect. High intensity current passing through a plasma will take on a corkscrew or spiral shape. This was discovered by Birkeland, so they're called Birkeland currents. They most often occur in pairs, and they tend to compress between them any material, ionized or not, in the plasma. And they call this the Z-pinch effect. I'll show you that in the diagram here in a minute. Cosmic matter tends to form an abundance of these filamentary, stringy kind of structures. The initial velocity of a particle is perpendicular to the magnetic field. The path that the particle takes is a circle in the plane perpendicular to the field. However, if the initial velocity of the particle is at an angle different from 90 degrees to the magnetic field, perhaps slightly in the same direction as the field, then the path will be a helix or a spiral. The stronger the field is, the smaller the radius of the circle will be. No matter what the initial direction of the current stream, it will end up following the direction of the magnetic field. And here's a diagram of that. It's called a Birkeland current. Okay? It starts at a helix and it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And that's the side view there on the left. To the right there is the top view, and what is being squeezed in there is called the Z-pinch. Whatever material in there is being squeezed by the Birkeland current. This just happens naturally within a plasma. These are very non-obvious things. The only way you discover this is by playing with them in a laboratory and discovering them. Both in the laboratory and in the cosmos, a pair of such spiraling currents will be observed. The interlinked pair will at first be magnetically drawn together, but after a certain proximity is achieved, the force of the repulsion is generated that holds them apart. This configuration turns out to be extremely stable. That's why it can span such enormous distances in our galaxy. The resulting tightly worn pair is called a Birkeland current. The attractive repulsive forces acting on this pair of currents creates a twisted, constricting cylindrical volume inside the spiral where extreme compression of matter can take place. When this occurs in cosmic space, the associated plasma filaments can be observed by the radiation they emit. Now, don't confuse this with the conjectures of gravity people about black holes. Black holes are conjectures. They're conjectures that are driven by a dependence of gravity. Gravity is not a factor. The plasma factors are. The scripture talks about stretching the heavens. Have you noticed that in the word? The fabric of space. Is this more than just a metaphor? Who alone stretches out the heavens in Job 9? Stretching out the heaven like a tent curtain in Psalm 104? Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in Isaiah 40? Are these just figures of speech? He has stretched out the heavens, Jeremiah 10. The Lord who stretches out the heavens in Zechariah 12. And on it goes. I could go on and on with these phrases throughout the scripture. They're familiar to you. Too consistent to be just figures of speech. Space, by the way, we discover, is not an empty vacuum. That's the presumption of science fiction writers who haven't done their homework. Space can be torn, Isaiah tells us in 64 chapter. It can be worn out like a garment, Psalm 102 tells us. It can be shaken. Can you shake empty space? Hebrews 12, Haggai 2, Isaiah 13, I'll make those references. Space can be burnt up, according to 2 Peter 3. You want to talk about global warming, Peter will explain it all to you in the 3rd chapter of the 2nd letter. Here's the interesting one. Space can apparently be split apart like a scroll. Really? Revelation 6. It can be rolled up like a mantle or a scroll. Now, wait a minute. For something to be rolled up, it must be, in some sense, thin, and there must be an additional dimension into which it can be bent. Right? The grammar requires that. Rolled up. See, there must be some dimension in which it can be thin, space can be bent, then there must be a direction into which it can be bent up toward. Thus, there are additional spatial dimensions, and 10 is a current estimate. The 4 we directly experience, and 6 that occur in less than 10 to the minus 35 centimeters, or they're smaller, they can only be inferred indirectly. Now, we also run, if you run into astronomy, you discover this Heidelberg formula. That's the barcodes of the atom. They're spectral lines of hydrogen on a logarithmic scale in this particular illustration. And it was invented by a Swedish physicist, Rydberg, in 1888. It's used in atomic physics to describe the wavelengths of the spectral lines of chemical elements. Very interesting, except we discover certain stars have their lines shifted to the red, but not always, sometimes to the blue. Ooh, why? The so-called red shift, back in the 20s, Edwin Hubble suggested what was called the Doppler effect as an explanation. He felt that the red shift was caused by these stars moving away from each other, like the Doppler effect. That remains, to this day, a widely accepted explanation, even though it's been punctured, by the way. In 1976, William Tift of the Stewart Observatory in Arizona noticed and documented the aberrant and digitized nature of red shifts. He spent 20 years doing this. In the 1980s, Guthrie and Napier at Edinburgh Observatory spent 10 years challenging the view of Tift and confirmed that Tift was correct, that these shifts are digitized. There's specific steps, which says they can't be a Doppler effect. They have something intrinsic to do with the molecular structure. Robert S. Millikan in 1925 noticed that the wavelengths of spectral lines were shifted from their theoretical position and was among the first to recognize that energy in space was battering the atoms and affecting their movement. These spectral lines are due to electrons moving between the energy levels of the atom, not the Doppler effect. And yet you find these old myths still populating our textbooks in college, let alone high school. Now, the ambient energy in what we think of empty space has come to be called the zero-point energy. And boy, this is a whole area of controversy in its own right. Zero-point energy, we think of empty space, especially if it's super cool and all that sort of stuff, as being an empty vacuum. Anybody here is a radio ham? If you're a radio ham, you try to tune your antenna to the impedance of space, right? You mean space has impedance? Absolutely. Every radio ham knows that. Max Planck in 1911, and then Einstein, Stern, and Nernst also recognized that this pervasive energy was a universal phenomenon intrinsic to space itself. Through the work of Heisenberg and others, it began to be understood that Planck's constant was actually a measurement of the uncertainty in the position of subatomic particles. By 1962, it was realized that this uncertainty of position was caused by the battering from the zero-point energy. The Heisenberg uncertainty effect is widely misunderstood, and it's of course explored by the New Agers who don't understand anyway, but that's neither here nor there. This energy is independent of temperature or mass, by the way. That's a surprising thing. In 1987, Hal Puthoff showed that the electrons stayed in their orbits and did not go either spinning out or spinning in due to the expended energy, precisely because of the energy they received from the zero-point energy. You ever wondered why these electrons keep spinning? Why don't they slow down? Because they're drawing on the zero-point energy. About 25 different methods, 475 measurements on 11 different related quantities confirmed that E is equal to, that the energy, which is constant, is Planck's constant times the speed of light. If the speed of light is slowing down, then the Planck's constant is increasing. And that's disturbing because we're discovering it is, and that's pulling the rug out from much of physics today. Properties of space. The zero-point energy is about 10 to the 95 ergs per cubic centimeter, and that's an unbelievable amount of energy per every cubic centimeter in space, empty space. It has permittivity, the absolute electric constant. It has permittivity, it has permeability, it has intrinsic impedance. Anybody that designs antennas deals with these things. And the velocity of light is essentially at the speed of gravity today. Well, it's interesting that Hebrews 11:3 says, "Though through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear." How descriptive. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Now, my professional technical background happens to be in the information sciences. I have masters and doctorates in a number of fields, but that's my primary specialty. I'm fascinated because this psalm has information science. Oh, and the other thing, as you study any field of science today, you'll discover that the frontier of that science lies in the area of information science. In the field of physics, you get into to quantum physics. It's an information science issue. If you go into microbiology, the whole thing is the coding of the DNA and all of that. That's an information science, switching theory issue, and so forth. The information science is at the frontier of every one of these. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament showeth, these are information terms. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard, and so forth. Their line goes going throughout all the earth. Their words to, it's interesting, this whole thing is information sciences. And it's interesting to me that one of the titles of our coming king is the Greek term for word, logos. How interesting. Their line has gone throughout the earth, their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of heaven, and is certain to the ends of it. And there's nothing hid from the heat thereof. How interesting. You know, the cynics will say, see there, everybody knows the sun doesn't rise in the east and set in the west. No one said it did. That's not what he's talking about. And if you look at all of this, and look at a map of our galaxy, you know, the sun it does travel literally from one end of heaven to the other, in an astronomical sense. And it's interesting also, it happens to be in the location in the galaxy that makes it possible to see the rest of the galaxy. And that's one of Richards and Gonzalez's book, The Privileged Planets, is a must-read, because you'll discover the universe was designed to be discovered. Not just for life, but discovered. The source for the entire solar system is, of course, the sun, as that psalm suggests, and nothing's hid from the heat thereof. When you see an eclipse, you see the corona, and anyone that has any experience with electromagnetism will tell right away that is a huge electromagnetic phenomenon. Okay? It was designed to be discovered. If you take the size of the sun, the size of the moon, the distance from the moon from the earth, and the distance of the sun, you discover that these dimensions have to be an exact number in order to see the corona. It turns out that these two distances and these rays have to be in a precise relationship. If it isn't, the moon will be too big to blot out the whole thing, or if it's too small, you'll be blinded by the rest of it. It's exactly the size and relationship. When the moon goes in front of that sun on a total eclipse, you can see the corona. And because you can see the corona, you discover spectroscopy. And out of spectroscopy, the whole universe starts to open up. And you begin to realize this was not only designed, it was not only designed for life on the planet Earth, it was designed to be discovered. And what a breathtaking thing that is to encounter. If you take a temperature profile of the sun, it's really quite surprising. Because the photosphere, the chromosphere, the corona is at a higher temperature than the rest of it. That's a surprise. Well, I thought the sun was just some kind of nuclear explosion. That's a guess. That's way out of whack. The sun, you're going to discover, is a very sophisticated light bulb. It's electromagnetic phenomenon. This is the temperature profile. If you take a voltage profile, it's somewhat the inverse of that. And as Bob Schober points out to me, this is simply identical to a solid-state PNP transistor. Boy, is there a clue there. Is that the way the sun is getting its energy as it passes through the fields of the universe? I'm expecting Bob to put his hat on and figure out a way, can we get a way to tap that energy for the SwanSat satellite system? That would be an exciting possibility. But there are electric currents in the sun, and here's a map of them. If you have a main current flowing in at both top and bottom, and they flow out at the perimeter, it creates secondary currents in each side, and those are now beginning to be understood. And if the main magnetic field starts to weaken intensity, a secondary surface current will reverse direction, and the magnetic polarity of the loops will also reverse. It does not depend upon the direction of the primary current. It's a question of strengthening or weakening. And these reversals appear to occur about every 11 years. And they have profound effects on what goes on the Earth, by the way. And so, if you have what we call a solar prominence, from a strong looping current will produce secondary magnetic field. It will surround and try to expand the loop. If the current becomes too strong, the double layer that contains it will be punctured, and if the voltage gradient becomes strong enough, the discharge path will break. The energy stored in the primary magnetic field will be explosively released into space, and you have what's called a prominence. That's piercing the double layer that produces what we call here a solar flare. How many have heard or seen solar flares? There's the electric diagram that explains them. Okay? Now here's a picture of the sun. There's the plasma magnetic field pictures of them. You can, by the very curvature, you can sense their magnetic properties here. Now, here is a very prominent solar flare. Let me show you the size of that. Let me put the Earth synthetically. It wouldn't get this close, but if the Earth was here, that's where the Earth would be. That's a big flare. That's the relative size of the Earth on that flare. Now, I'd like to show you, I'm hoping this will work now. Well, anyway, we'll move on here. We look at a leaf. You discover that it's been designed to take those frequencies from the sun and produce a lot of different things. You have a thing called photosynthesis, which is being built with light. These are sugar factories with millions of new glucose molecules per second. Most plants produce more glucose than they use and store it as starch and other carbohydrates and root stems and leaves. Each year, photosynthesis organisms produce about 170 billion metric tons of extra carbohydrates, about 30 metric tons for every person on the Earth. So we have an amazing dependency, not only the design of the universe and the design of the sun, but how the plants produce the oxygen and the sugar to feed the animals, and how the animals produce the CO2, which causes the whole thing to work. And we find the interconnection here is so complex, it'd take better part of an hour just to explain the different steps in the photosynthetic process. But the elegance of design, the more you study it, staggers you to realize the degrees to which God went to provide the environment that we enjoy every day. Genesis chapter 1, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament which divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. There are two words that are translated here by the 1611 translators that need a little more reach. Rakia actually means an extended surface, expanse. It's labeled firmament in our English translation. It's an expanse, meaning it is a flat as a base or support. The Hebrew word signifies like a sheet spread or a curtain drawn out, is the thought. The other word there, that's mayim, which is translated waters, recognize that it's a term as close as they could get to suggesting fluids. Transitory things, fluids. And I'm going to suggest plasmas. That term was invented when we discovered what plasmas were. It also can mean danger or violence. It implies motion, if you will. So let me take a liberty here and use modern terms and translate those things. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the plasmas, and let it divide the plasmas from the plasmas. And God made the expanse and divided the plasmas which were under the expanse from the plasmas which were above the expanse, and it was so. So I suggest that as a possibility. God challenges Job. He says, can thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? These are constellations that are tied together, not by gravity, by electromagnetism. The seven sisters, the Pleiades, are a group of stars, but they're physically, they look like they're together. They're actually quite distant between them. What's binding them together is the equations of James Clerk Maxwell, not the equations of Sir Isaac Newton. The boundaries of reality. We've gone a quick glimpse here, talk about size to the right. We've talked a little bit about the macrocosm, that it's finite, and that's led to all kinds of conjectures that need to be repaired in both astronomy and astrophysics. On the small side, the microcosm, we've talked about the indivisible units, the quantum physics, the subatomic particles. There is a concept that ties this all together. Because if we take a look at the metacosm, we know that we're in a digital simulation. We talked about that. Our universe is but a shadow of a larger reality, praise God. But what ties us together in the microcosm, we've been talking about the zero-point energy, right? And what ties that together to the macrocosm are the plasmas. And so we really close the loop, if you will, if you follow me here. I encourage you to get a book by Donald E. Scott. It's not only, it's an excellent tutoring device, because he's an outstanding communicator, and he makes this whole subject very direct and illuminating without talking down to you. The Electric Sky, a challenge to the myths of modern. Much of what I've drawn here is drawn from his book. It's readily available. A more technical term, maybe more greater historic interest, is Pratt's Physics of the Plasma Universe. But if you Google any of these guys on the internet, you will get a plethora of resources and references that will take you through this. Now, we put what you've experienced here this evening is the boundaries of what we call the Boundaries of Reality series. We did a thing called Beyond Time and Space many years ago, talking about the impact of Einstein's theory of relativity and the nature of time and the nature of space and hyperspaces. We've just republished that, freshened it up, and put it out as a DVD for those that are interested. Another one that we started 14 years ago, Beyond Coincidence, the evidence of deliberate design, the anthropic principle as it's called, the hidden messages that are in plain sight, and how sure can we really be that the Bible is the Bible? And we deal with that head on in a thing called Beyond Coincidence. And then the third one in the trilogy was Beyond Perception, which is basically the nature of matter, the subatomic world, the holographic universe, and the dimensions beyond our own. And we call that Beyond Perception. This was our famous trilogy that we've just republished and freshened up and brought up to date, but we've added a fourth to the trilogy. So I guess I have to call it a quartet now. And the fourth one that we've reviewed, perhaps superficially tonight, I call it Beyond Newton, challenging the myths of astronomy, the Burnham celestial model, the plasma universe, and so forth. And we've also packaged these all four into a package for those that want to do that for what it's worth. So I encourage you to explore that. So I think I'm out of gas. I do want to highlight something that you need to know. How many of you are saved? Can I see your hands? Praise God, that's step one. That's more important than anything else. That job was done 100% at Golgotha by our coming King. But many people are not aware that there's a second step. Do you know that the disciples that were called, they were saved, but they were called? How many of you don't have to show? Well, how many feel that you're called to be a disciple? Okay, see, there are not quite as many hands. Okay, I understand that. That's candor. See, the first thing is to discover your salvation. It's available in Jesus Christ by just trusting Him. Praise God, He did it all. You can't add to what He did. That would be blasphemous. But there's another step that you want to be sensitive to. Did God save you? Why? There are many stories in this room. Some of them very dramatic, some maybe quite straightforward. But every one of us in this room that can raise their hand about being saved are the result of a miracle. I believe that miracle is the result of someone's prayer. The question is, why were you saved? There's a collective reason to glorify God, of course. I'm going to suggest the possibility of a specific reason. God saved you for a specific calling. And let me tell you candidly, I've been married for 53 years. I've been a Christian for, 65, I guess. I've had a life of incredible adventures, and I won't bore you with that panorama, except to make this point. In a life of incredible adventures, the most exciting one is right now. To discover your calling.
So, who is correct? Is Steve Hawking's and his camp correct with their gravitational models, mathematical models of black hole theory, or were they wrong to ignore the whole plasma theory? As you already know, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And the fact that they have to, invent all these things, like all these mysterious black holes and dark matter and just everything, to explain away all the problems with their model, makes you kind of wonder if maybe their model's not the correct one. And, with the establishment in place, everybody knows the scientific establishment is controlling pretty much all the different theories that are around today. They don't want to let go of the evolutionary theory, or they don't want to let go of this gravitational understanding of our universe. So it makes you kind of wonder who is really the one who's being ideological and who's the one that's actually being scientific,